Hey everyone, my name is Zan Ali and this is the first video of my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the UCAT, an exam's coming up soon for most, if not all of you. Chances are you're probably proper stressed right now, and I have a couple of tips and tricks that I used literally last week to secure a score in the UCAT that I think is really competitive. I'm going to be breaking down all the resources I used first, the time frame I spent on my sort of long-term plan when preparing the UCAT, then tips on individual subsections, all 5 of them, and then at the end, approaching test day as a whole. Preparing for the UCAT about 6 weeks out away from test day, I used Medify from the beginning. I did use a week trial of MedEntry as well, which is about £15, I believe, and the official UCAT resources. And I think with 2 of these 3, you either use the UCAT resource and 1 of Medify and MedEntry, you have more than enough question banks and resources to get a really good score in the UCAT. My plan was about 5 to 6 weeks out, I'd just be starting timed questions for each section, getting used to every single question type, finding what I enjoyed, what I didn't enjoy, trying techniques that I found online, on YouTube videos, and then honing what worked for me and different techniques. It was more about familiarization with me than about, trying to get a really high score and stuff. 4 weeks out, once I got used to the time pressure of doing just question sets of UCAT, I'd start doing the mini mocks alongside the question sets. And this is where you start to see small bits of improvement through reflecting and reviewing your mini mocks. Specifically, where if you're taking too long on a question, looking at why that happened. If it's one that you knew you weren't going to get, even if you're given 10 minutes to do that single question, then next time if it comes up, you skip it. If it's something you can't get your head around. But if it's one of those ones where you take slightly too long and the answer sheet below gives you a better method, then it's about noting that method down and trying it next time. So you're basically trying to nullify your mistakes and try and improve them and make them your strengths when you're doing mini mocks. Alongside that, for me personally, I didn't want to get bored of UCAT, so I would do question sets of what I'd find the most fun. I know it's UCAT, but abstract reasoning, quantitative reasoning, something that would make me feel a bit better when doing them, because I do VR and I feel awful after failing it completely. So it's about, for me, with quantitative and abstract reasoning, honing down the techniques and trying to score as high as I can, because that's a strength for me. And if I could supersize that strength, make it, consistently high, then it's more than enough to carry a poor VR score that I was talking about earlier. And then for me, that's how I was improving, mainly by reflecting and reviewing, and then doing maybe small question sets on my weakest parts of each mini mock. And getting, obviously I'm used to the time pressure by now, so that 2 weeks out, I could start doing pretty much a mock a day. And again, this is where the majority of my improvement came, because I was starting about 2650, 2600, sometimes higher than 2800, but my average is about that 2650. And the improvement came 95%, I'd say, through reflecting on the mock, like taking time, especially in quantitative reasoning, abstract reasoning, and decision making, in really looking at why I went wrong in the section. Also, it can be easy to get bogged down in bad scores during this point, 2 weeks out. You think that, your exam's coming up, but it's one of those things where if you get a bad score, you quickly move on after doing a detailed review of exactly why you went wrong in each specific subsection. What's important is, as I said, if you're taking too long on a question, it will come up red. Note down why. Why was that? Why did you take so much time on that specific question? And if the answer is given you a much shorter answer, then trying to use that next time and improve. Also, knowing when to skip. So you realize that, okay, there are some questions you are never going to get, so try and skip them for next time. Though I'd say most of you shouldn't be focusing on this kind of stuff. For those of you who are interested, the comparisons between the official UCAT and the resources I used, I'd say that VR in the official UCAT was harder than anything I'd done before. I think I personally was unlucky with a longer passage set for verbal reasoning. so Medify, MedEntry, none of them had text as long as I got in the official UCAT one. Not to say that you're going to get equally long passages, because again it's randomized, but just food for thought. Decision making was pretty accurate across all three platforms that I used compared to the official UCAT. I'd say that once you get a strategy and get used to the question types, you'll be fine in terms of difficulty between the official UCAT and what you use to prepare. Quantitative reasoning, for me personally, was far easier in the official UCAT than in any of the resources I used. Again, I think because of the slight luck-based element of the UCAT exam, where they generate random sections for you, probably played a part in that. But I'd say that if you can hone down a good technique for quantitative reasoning, then no matter the difficulty of the question set, you can still score well. Lastly, abstract reasoning. I know I've heard people online say that it's much easier than Medify, MedEntry, or the official UCAT. For me, that wasn't the case. Not that it should be a worry to you, because if you can get a lower score, the scale score is still a decently high score. Like you can maybe get 30 out of 50 or something and still get a decently high score. So it's not one of those things where you have to worry and stress about as much. And I don't think any of this is as important anyway, but for those of you who are interested. Now on to the individual sections. First off being verbal reasoning. And pre-warning, for me, verbal reasoning was the section I considered my sort of throwaway section, as in previous research had proved that people make the least improvement on verbal reasoning. And I'd say that you can have one section that maybe if you don't score as well as you'd like, it's not too big of a problem, because you can rescue it with 3 of your other stronger sections. For me, verbal reasoning, I couldn't read long text, process information, and answer questions at the kind of speed that UCAT needs. So my technique was I would ignore the passage at first. I would look at the questions, look at all the answer options, and pick out keywords, and then scan through the text and try and match the keywords and figure out the answer from there. Also, you know that there's going to be 11 passages in whatever verbal reasoning test you end up doing. And of those, I think 3 or 4 max sections can be ones that if they are too long, you can instantly guess, flag, and skip, so long as you can score a decent percentage on the rest of the passages. Obviously, the time pressure element means that if you're taking too long on a question, again, guess, flag, and skip. That's so important. Swallowing the ego and pride and thinking that even if you can't do this question, you gotta just go skip it, guess it, flag it, move on. Verbal reasoning is one of those sections where, again, as I said, there's not much improvement. But if you're from the beginning scoring consistently high, as few of you as there probably are, it's one of those things where you can maintain that score by constantly doing practice questions and everything. Now, when it comes to my practice, what I did for verbal reasoning across the weeks, I barely did any question sets or mini mocks when it came to it. So in the first 5-6 weeks, again, there was no real need for me to do any practice questions at all for me, I felt. 4 weeks out is when I started doing mini mocks on all the sections apart from verbal reasoning, as I felt that was my throwaway. And the only time I really came across it was 2 weeks out when I started doing full mocks. And again, I was noticing that, okay, I was getting inconsistent scores. Sometimes I do all right, sometimes I wouldn't. But for me, I took comfort in the fact that I do better in the other sections. And if I got a high score in VR, then it's a bonus. Right. Decision making is the first section of the ones that I decided, you know what, I need to get big scores in this. And decision making, it has 6 question types, as you know, and half of them I was strong at, and half of them I was sometimes good, sometimes a bit dodgy, and I'd take too long on. And obviously, despite the fact that it's a minute a mark, it is very time pressured, as is the whole UCAT. But with decision making, having a tactic for every time is key, because there's going to be question types which you're really, really strong at and you're doing quickly and you can score highly in, and then there's going to be some of the question types where you take long and you're not getting high scores all of the time. It's really inconsistent. So for me personally, simple syllogisms I'd be able to score comfortably high in, and the probability and Venn diagram questions at the very end I'd score pretty much 100% in all the time. So my strategy would be, after going through the short syllogisms and getting through them nice and quickly, there's a navigator button in the official UCAT and in some of the resources, including the official UCAT mocks, A, B, C, and D. You go to the end, or for me, this is what I did. I went to the end, question 29, and they're all probability and Venn diagram questions, and I'd work backwards from there, securing full marks in however many 10, 12 questions there were, boosting my confidence, getting through them quickly, before attempting the longer syllogisms, evaluating arguments, and the logic puzzles. Now, for those longer questions and the probability questions, I'd say it is key to use the whiteboard you're given. And when you're practicing, you have to have some sort of notebook or some medium to write down your thoughts and decision making, because working at that speed, your brain cannot hold all of the information constantly again and again for each question, and you get an efficient high score. So for me, even in the simple syllogism, I draw a flow chart of what thing leads to another. So if it's all animals are big, then I'd put animals an arrow to big and label the arrow all, and I'd be able to have a visualization of the question so that anything that's not in it I can instantly put no, and anything that follows on one of the arrows will be a yes. Unlike verbal reasoning, decision making's yes no syllogisms have short enough passages that you can spend in a decent amount of time reading them in detail, because you get a minute a mark and the passages are shorter. So what's important here is processing all the information accurately and quickly. Well, not too quickly that you skip over key bits of information with syllogisms. And if you use my technique of, for example, if you're stronger at probability and Venn diagrams, doing them first and then spending the extra time you save on syllogisms, you can spend that extra time using this method and really in detail getting the prompt of the syllogisms, maybe drawing out a flow chart for the shorter ones like I do, and they can maximize your score big time. With my logic puzzles and the evaluating arguments and Venn diagram, I'd say it is so important that you have the whiteboard in terms of noting down the order of things, or if you're given some data but not all of the data, you can make a table of what person has what, for example, in a logic puzzle. And again, it can be inconsistent, but if you can score, especially in the single multiple choice questions, not the yes no ones, 100% in the majority of them, then you can take confidence before going into the longer syllogisms where you have to get 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5 to get any marks. As much as you get a minute or slightly over a minute per mark with decision making, it is still important to skip if you're taking more than that minute assigned for that question and it's going to take much longer. Even if you think you can do the question, clocking that, okay, it's taking too long, and then moving on will save you so much time, because you have more time for more questions, so more marks in that same amount of time you saved. So as much as it seems that, you have quite a bit of time and you don't really need to skip, you just attempt every single question one by one, the time will quickly run out unless you practice that skipping and knowing that, okay, this is the loads of steps, or I can't do this question, guessing, flagging, skipping, moving on. I'm going to say that a lot throughout this video, but it is so important if you want to get the kind of UCAT scores you're hoping for. Quantitative reasoning is a section that I believe every single person watching this video should be maximizing their score with. I think because even if you think you're terrible at maths or whatever, which you're not, it's year 8 or year 9 maths you learn in year 8 or year 9, and it's just doing that under more time pressure conditions. Now the whiteboard becomes a very big key factor, which I'm going to touch on, but the number one tip for scoring highly in quantitative reasoning is, obviously before you attempt the question, is think up all the steps in your head. And if it's more than 3 or 4 steps, even if you can do it and it seems easy, 3 or 4 long steps, you guess, flag, and you skip. So say it's adding up all the averages for one table section of the table, and then all the average of all the data in the other section of the table, and finding a percentage difference, for example. Now you might be able to do that all accurately, but the time it will take to do that question will probably cost you 5 or 6 other short questions if you just don't skip, flag, and move on. So even if you can do the question, again, swallow the pride and just move on. UCAT purposely create these questions, longer questions, in order to make you waste time. So they want you to realize that, okay, if it's a long question, you triage or you prioritize the shorter questions and skip past the longer questions. And even if you end up skipping 4, 5, 6 QR questions as you're going through it, but you're getting through all the short answer questions quickly and accurately, you're going to be so much more efficient. You'll probably have time left at the end to attempt a few of the longer questions that you skipped when you went through the first time. The calculator obviously is dodgy, and one thing I'd say is that if you have values that are part of the result of part steps, rather than store it in your calculator because it's a bit dodgy to do that, I just recommend writing down the value on the whiteboard and then typing it out again with the answer that you do for the second step, for example. So using the whiteboard and figuring out how to use it in tandem with the calculator is important. Also, I'd say mental maths is definitely something you want to be getting tip top at, realistically, if you want to be doing well in QR, because sometimes you can skip out on the calculator, and if you can do a quick addition, quick subtraction, you're probably saving time rather than using the keyboard and typing out, the calculation. Speaking of which, when practicing, you always want to be having this number pad right here when using the calculator, as opposed to using the mouse to click the numbers on your calculator. Again, it's all about, can you save time and answer quickly and accurately with QR. For abstract reasoning, reflection is probably the most important thing, which got me the high marks that I wanted and I was happy with when I did my UCAT. And that is, obviously, there's only a certain number of patterns that UCAT can make for you. And if there's one you don't get, or there's a couple that you don't get in a practice set, note them all down in a reflection bank and categorize them under your different categories, like, with the any sort of acronym you use, or so say you have a number of shapes or number of sides or number of intersections, and under each category, note down the specific pattern you don't get. And it's one of those things where if you just read through it over the day before your test and just refresh your mind with patterns you didn't get and say, oh yeah, there's a pattern I didn't get, then you're going to be armed with so many patterns that some of them are just going to come automatically to you in the official UCAT. And I'd say you can afford to skip 1 or 2 patterns if you don't get them, bearing in mind that if you guess all those 10 questions, you're probably going to get maybe 2 or 3 right as well. So obviously, by now, with all the practice you're probably doing, abstract timing seems fine for you. So, and obviously bearing in mind, you want to be doing maybe 30, 40 seconds max figuring out the pattern. It's one of those ones where sometimes you might be inconsistent and stuff, but trust me, noting it down in that reflection bank will just keep your score consistently over time, the long term, your score going up and up. As you know, the more patterns, the better your score is likely to be. Another key tip for abstract reasoning I found really helped my score, especially in those questions where sometimes you're just not getting that pattern, is I'd physically take almost a step back in my chair, and I'd look holistically at the whole set of pattern of shapes in A and the whole set of patterns in B, and find, okay, from afar, what is there everything of in A and everything of in B. And especially where you have, say, for example, a shape that's in a certain corner, one type of shape in one corner, one type of shape in the other corner for A and B, you can almost nullify going through, say, your acronyms or trying to spend too much time overthinking, and you can almost just vibe out the answer from afar because one looks more like set A, one looks more like set B. And for those questions where you need to save time on, or you're finding difficult, you can maybe secure 5-6 extra key marks from this method, which will no doubt boost your score to the kind of ones you'd be hoping for. SJT is one of those sections where I wasn't really getting anywhere near band 1 until the very end, near my UCAT, because I never did any practice questions of it. I thought, from what I heard, that, oh, if you're smart, you're not dumb, you're not a bad person, you make the right decisions. But what you come to realize, if you do loads of SJT questions, like maybe half an hour every other day, or if you're closer to your exam pretty much every day, SJT, if you're doing a mock, is that the themes, they repeat. And what I mean by themes is, for example, the patient's life being at risk, or a doctor respecting the patient's belief, or the doctor causing an argument, or breaking professional bonds, for example. And you realize they just repeat all of these themes in different contexts. And after doing a bunch of them, you realize that it's one theme is always going to be very important or more important. And furthermore, sometimes you get multiple themes in SJT, and one takes priority over another. And by doing these questions again and again, you realize, okay, so this situation will take priority over this situation. The patient's belief and their decision takes priority over what you think is best for them, for example. And like abstract reasoning, you want to have a reflection bank of stuff you didn't get, themes you didn't get, and noting that down in your reflection bank. Effort, but that is pretty much one of the ways that you're going to get a high score on UCAT. I'm pretty sure you've heard this, but for the situational judgment test, reading the GMC document is helpful. Obviously not memorizing the whole thing, but simply scanning for some stuff that you realize, okay, so this type of situation takes priority, because it literally lists the right ethical thing to do in terms of situational judgment. Because the whole point of the test is not what do you feel like you need to do, what do your emotions say, but what is the right thing to do as a medical professional, because that's the type of situation they're simulating. One simple trick I don't think enough people are doing is simply after doing their mini mocks or mocks, just realizing what type of question they're constantly losing on over like a period of time, maybe over a week. You're constantly getting probability question wrong in decision making, or interest questions in quantitative reasoning over maybe a week or so. Then just doing a question set and reviewing why you're going wrong and trying to improve, or in the future skipping those questions to save time on others and scoring more accurately on the other question types, will definitely boost your score, and as a tactic that everyone should be using if they want the high scores. Lastly, for overall tips, and I think this will probably be the most useful for all of you watching, because you pretty much got to the stage where you know what you're doing, you've got pretty much a set tactic for every single section and you're going through it, but maybe your scores are inconsistent, or you're starting to feel mentally drained, for example. And mentality is one of those things that can make or break your UCAT and then your application. Nowadays, everyone's got social media and people are posting all about the UCAT. I mean, so am I, over what they're doing. But sometimes there's just so much noise that you get from scrolling through your social media and everything's to do with UCAT, that you get overwhelmed with different opinions. And in the end, it comes down to you. It's you alone in that test center who's going to be sitting that exam. So if you realize, some people are saying, oh, how much easier this website was, or how much more optimal this website was for preparing for the UCAT, and you're doing something different and you feel that pressure, it's only going to affect you negatively. Obviously, if you're further away from the exam, then fine, you can still experiment. But close to the exam, it's about sticking to your techniques. Don't listen to outside noise, and having that one thing that maybe you can do outside of UCAT, even up until the very last day, that's not UCAT related at all, to keep your mental health good and your brain fresh, because it's a 2-hour marathon that you're doing when you sit the UCAT. So you want to be as fresh as possible on the day. The day before, I personally did, or 24 hours before my UCAT, I did nothing UCAT related. For me, it was about relaxing my brain, priming my brain so that I was rested and ready to go for 2 hours as one last push, as hard as I could. And that is really important, because as much as you want to be thinking about UCAT and focusing and trying to improve your score, if you get too bogged down and you forget everything else, looking after yourself and things, it's only going to affect your UCAT score negatively, not to mention your holistic well-being. So that is very important. And I think having one person who's maybe sitting the test similar date to you, who you're close with, who has your best interests at heart genuinely as well as their own, is important, so you can rant at them, sometimes if you're getting a bad score, or you can ask them for advice, or if you can talk to them about what you're going through, and you both support each other and form that positive relationship. It's only going to better your UCAT score and your health in general. And that is the video. Please leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment, tell me how I did for my first video. And there is definitely more to come because it's a long journey, so look out for BMAT prep, me discussing ethical topics, interview prep, what I'm going to be doing. And yeah, thank you for watching.